Welcome to Galaxy Tenants, an Earthbound podcast from the Milky Way galaxy. My name is Jay Picard, and co-producing this episode is my wife, Carly. Galaxy Tenants will be a podcast without format and will feature stories, conversations, and timely topics. We'll output a handful of episodes to start, and the podcast will take shape as we go. Down the road, we intend to have call-ins, interviews, and guests. Normal folks talking about their experiences, musicians, artists, doctors, maybe even the mailman or my cat.
We're excited about our first episode.
I had a great conversation with Ben Wright from the Henhouse Prowlers and Bluegrass Ambassadors about life in Chicago, Ben's musical projects, and a very cool story about Ben's long-lost banjo returning to him.
Stay tuned for an exclusive song from Naryan Padmanabha. Let's head to Chicago for a conversation with Ben Wright.
This is Jay with Galaxy Tenants, and I'm here with one of my favorite musicians, definitely my favorite banjo player, one of my favorite people, Ben Wright from the Henhouse Prowlers and the Bluegrass Ambassadors. How are you, Ben?
I'm great, Justin. It's good to hear you.
and see. We are in a Skype call. That's how we're doing it. So we pull the audio from here. But yeah, good to see and hear you, buddy.
Yeah.
How's life in Chicago?
Well, it's fairly similar to what I just read. 3 out of 4 people in the United States. We are definitely on lockdown. We have been for a couple weeks now. This is Monday, but it doesn't feel like it necessarily.
It is Monday today.
Yeah. I had to think about it. I'm walking the dog more than I ever have in my entire life, and trying to figure out what this all means alongside every other human being that I'm lucky enough to be in touch with. So, yeah.
I appreciate your perspective on that. And when I think of Chicago, I think of you. You're one of the biggest proponents of the city in my life, at least. You're always ready for a conversation about Chicago. You're always pushing Chicago. You've tried to convince me to move there.
That's right.
and I've been there a few times recently, and it's a fucking lovely city. What are some of your favorite things about Chicago?
Well, I've been here for 20 years now, and I'm really proud to call this city my home. As a professional musician, it really helped shape my career, being surrounded by the opportunities that come with living in a city this size, but also with that as much heart as this city has. There is a music scene here that is unbelievably supportive and varied. So I can go out. I used to be able to go out every night of the week and see music that everything from jazz at the Green Mill to bluegrass at the Tonic Room on a Monday night, and thousands of genres in between. So from my perspective as a musician, this is where I bought my first banjo and where I got infected with the bug, and then where I just slowly developed a career over 20 years. And so that's the musical perspective, but I just love the physicality and the emotion of this city. There is the lake is just a mile east of me here, and even though they had to shut it down the other day because too many people were congregating there, there's a reason why that was happening. As stupid as those people were, it is a great allure. I'll pop on my bike and with my banjo on my back in the summer and go down there and find a tree to sit under and play the banjo with what looks like an ocean in front of you, even though it's just Lake Michigan, and it's gorgeous. But then the food here is unbelievable. Just in my neighborhood alone, I don't have to leave my neighborhood to get pretty much any kind of food that I want, from Vietnamese to gastropub to Indian to Nepalese. Like, I mean, that's all within 4 blocks of me. And if you're within the city limits, that's what it's like everywhere. But everybody that I try to give a tour of Chicago to, it is always blown away by how it's so neighborhood based, and every neighborhood has its identity, and there's something really alluring about that. It's like I've lived in 4 different neighborhoods since I've lived here, and each of those living experiences was completely different, with some commonality coursing through it, but they were all completely different neighborhoods with different personalities and different kinds of people living in them. And I just love it. And that's, I think, one of the things that I love about Chicago is it is kind of this draw for people from all sorts of different cultures, speaking different languages. And they all, for the most part, figure out how to live together and share in this beautiful modern city that we have.
It's an incredible place, and I think for sure the diversity is something that really appealed to me as well. And you're lucky to call a place like Chicago home. In Chicago, you talked about playing banjo, and that's how you kind of found your footing with banjo and the bluegrass genre. Can you tell me about a band like the Henhouse Prowlers coming up in an urban setting like Chicago, and what that kind of does for a band, or how that affects a band in that genre?
Yeah,
because and sorry to interrupt, just when I think of banjo music, I don't think of Chicago.
Yeah, there's 2 different ways to tackle that concept, really. In one way, Chicago actually has a really rich history with folk music, and just this week, another Chicago bluegrass band, the Special Consensus, just released their newest album, and it's called the Chicago Barn Dance, because the precursor to the Grand Ole Opry started here as the WLS Chicago Barn Dance. And it was that everybody in the country turned in to hear the Chicago Barn Dance in the 1940s. And eventually it moved south and turned into the Grand Ole Opry. But there really is this kind of deep folk music connection here. And on top of that, we have the Old Town School of Folk Music, which is where I bought my first banjo and learned how to play. And so it's definitely, I understand why people don't associate the city with a banjo or folk music in general. But if they come here, they pick up pretty quick on the fact that that's not the case. That being said, it's still very much an urban environment, not the country, not the place where typically bluegrass music, certainly up until the 90s, came from. We both know that these days there's bluegrass bands making amazing music coming out of everything from New York City to the Netherlands. I mean, it's definitely blown up in the past 20, 30 years.
Yeah, the musicians have definitely come out of the hills as far as that genre goes. But I didn't know that about the show that preceded the Grand Ole Opry. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I did have a chance to visit the Old Town School of Folk Music within the last year, and it was my first time being there. And what a special place that is.
Oh, yeah, it's really magical, and I live like kitty corner to it, and my neighborhood every night is full of people with instruments on their backs going to take lessons. And for me, that's why I should continue to live in this neighborhood, even though I'm starting to get priced out of it because it's gentrifying. But that's the case of every city these days. But, I don't want to deny at the same time that this city had its own effect on the fact that we're playing bluegrass here. And, we started playing at a little hole in the wall on the north side of the city and we are very much Chicagoans. That's just what we are. And so it definitely has shaped our music. And I'm proud to provide that information to people, like about the barn dance and the history here. But I don't get mad at people for thinking. I definitely hear all the time, how did a bluegrass band come out of Chicago? So it's a common thing. But our music has always skewed a little darker and a little more urban, even though that's a weird moniker to put on things. I think that's part of why we've we've not always played the happiest songs in the world. Like, I think when you're exposed to people from different parts of the world, you get a better grasp on how things aren't always rosy everywhere. And we can't legitimately sing about the countryside, like there are times we play some trad tunes occasionally, traditional tunes occasionally that are, I wonder how the old folks are at home and Blue Ridge Cabin Home. But there is always this twinge of like, we're not really being authentic when we do that stuff. So we stick to our own material as much as possible.
Yeah, and you guys do really at this point have that Chicago feel. Like, you are, to me at least, the definition of Chicago bluegrass.
Thanks, Justin.
Yeah, of course. You mentioned to me that you guys have a viral video out there in Kenya at current. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so this just happened in the past 48 hours. It's been wild to be sitting at my computer. So a little bit of backstory. We for the past 6 years have done a lot of work with the U.S. State Department as musical diplomats, and we've been to 26 countries now. I should be in Africa right now, honestly. Like, we would have left yesterday if the virus hadn't shut down the whole world for another one of those trips. And so we go to all sorts of different countries and learn music from those countries and try to form bonds between musicians from those countries and us, but also just between citizens and us. And we learned really quickly that if we learned not only the music of popular artists in those countries, but the words, if we learned to sing in the language, that it had this profound effect on our ability to connect with people. And we went to Kenya back in 2016 and had a really incredible time there, and met this band, Sauti Sol, and we learned a song called Suriako. And one of the things we do with these trips is we don't just come home and kind of forget about them. We continue to play that music at home and use it as an opportunity to kind of educate people back in the States about what life is like in other parts of the world and what music is like. And we just last month we were in Atlanta and we did a paced studio session, and we picked 3 songs, and one of them was that song Suriako by Sauti Sol. And so a really nicely recorded, really good audio version of it went on YouTube. And I got a message 2 days ago from somebody at the embassy in Kenya saying, "Oh my God, you got to see this." And somebody had ripped the video off of YouTube and made like a 30-second clip and shared it on Instagram and on Twitter over there, and it blew up. And it was, half the people were laughing their asses off and making fun of us, and the other half were like, "Oh my God, look at these white guys singing in Swahili." And I mean, that's the same reaction we get every time with those kinds of things, but to see it kind of unfold on the internet, and like our numbers started going up on all 3 social media platforms. And it's funny to see my Facebook feed where it's like this, 17 people have become your fans in the past 15 minutes, and they're all clearly from Kenya.
Well, I think whether people are laughing at you or whether people are enjoying what you're doing, it's connectivity either way.
Absolutely.
Either way, they're connecting to something you're outputting. I think there's something really beautiful that that does for people. And this is actually the first interview we've done on our new podcast is with you, and this was by design, in that our podcast is called Galaxy Tenants, and it's going to be hopefully a very diverse podcast. And in taking that approach, you're somebody who has traveled all over the world and taken one of the rare things that exists, and that's an original American genre, and you've taken that and shared that with the rest of the world. And I think that's really incredible. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, believe me, it's the biggest honor I could have ever asked for,
and you're deserving of this to a point that is beyond, anybody that I know. And I know people who are passionate about music, but I don't know people who are passionate about music like you are. There's a certain way that your passion translates to a global output. And, most people are in their little thing doing what they do. And you've taken on something so much more than that. And I think it's so cool and so unique. In telling a positive story or in talking about positives at Current, there's a story that came across my Facebook feed about a banjo that you had go missing and find its way back to you. And I remember the original post, and you can kind of give more context to this and tell the story, but I remember the original post a while back when your tour van was broken into and that banjo went missing. Do you want to pick up from there and kind of tell folks about that?
Yeah, so it's actually loosely connected to the story I was just telling you about Africa, because the program that started us doing the international touring with the State Department is called American Music Abroad, which I highly recommend any band consider auditioning for. And we auditioned for it out in San Francisco for the very first time, and it was very stressful. You're sitting in front of a bunch of diplomats, and they're writing on clipboards and not really responding. And we thought we had totally not gotten it, but we were just relieved that it was over, and went that night to a friend's house and had a few beers, and very stupidly left our instruments in our van. A mistake that we will never make again. And that night, somebody came and emptied out our van, including John's double bass. Just everything, and including my banjo that I was very fond of, and they were just gone. And we that night or that day, we woke up that morning and we had one more show left on the tour, and we just realized we had to cancel it and go home. There just wasn't anything we could do. We filed a police report, and then went home and drove 30 hours from San Francisco to Chicago in an empty van. And, when you're used to driving a van that has a bunch of stuff in it, our merch, everything, it drives differently than when there's nothing in it. And like every bump was this reminder that we had been robbed on the way home. And this was 7 years ago. And so the banjo, I had Deering banjos within 3 days. There was a new banjo at my doorstep. The whole community reached out, and it was unbelievable, but still a piece of me was gone. And just 2 days ago, I got a phone call in the morning from a guy I hadn't talked to in a long time. And it was the guy who built that banjo. And he was like, "Ben, I was on eBay last night and I saw your banjo." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" He's like, "Oh, I sent you a link." And I went and opened it up, and there it was on eBay, like sitting on a piece of cardboard.
Any worse for wear?
I couldn't tell from the photograph. I could definitely tell it was my fucking banjo. And so I reached out to the seller. This is funny, I put a post on Facebook, like kind of saying like, "Hey, what do I do?" Like who has experience? And of course, just like 180 people responded. And I had posted a picture of the guy's email, like a screenshot of the guy's eBay account. And apparently everybody started messaging him. And he was this guy in San Francisco who was like a reseller. He told me, he's like, yeah, I got this from a guy at a flea market. He wants me to sell it for him. And he was clearly like Chinese, I think, and his English wasn't very good. And every message that was coming into him on eBay, he was assuming it was somebody else claiming it was their banjo, when it was really them being like, give it back to Ben. But his English was so poor. So I had to beg people to stop sending him messages because he was getting confused.
200 people are saying it's their banjo.
Yeah, right. That's what he thought. And then he didn't understand. And I was like, no, I've got friends and fans that are invested in this story. And that didn't make sense to him either. So finally I was just like, he's like, I'll give you the banjo. The guy wanted $300 for it. And I told him, I was like, I'll pay you the $300. Like, here's what's your PayPal? And boom, I sent him the money. And 2 days later, he sent me a message and said, I went and got the case from the flea market, and it's in the mail. And it just showed up 2 days ago. Like,
wow.
So I guess my timing's off on this. It was about a week ago that I found out about it. But the banjo just came in the mail 2 days ago, and it's my banjo, and it's back in my hands.
Is it in good shape?
It's in good enough shape. It needs some work.
Sure.
It's been 7 years. But I mean, the doorbell rang and I knew what it was. And my fiance Cassie was standing there as I ripped it out of the package and saw the case. Like, the case meant a lot to me too. It was like, it's a cult case. They're as good of a case as you can buy. And like, so there it was, like, and it had been stripped. All the stickers had been taken off the case, and the case is so nice. It has a serial number, and that was also removed off the case. But it's back in my possession, and
it's a piece of your past. I bet you never thought you'd see that again, eh?
I never did. Never thought I would. Yeah,
that's really cool, man.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to discuss while I have you?
Yeah. I mean, we're doing educational component through Bluegrass Ambassadors for to be doing something. Bluegrass Ambassadors is our nonprofit organization that we started a while back, that's based on the international work we do, and we go to schools and do work with kids, teaching them music from all over the world, but we also go to festivals and do workshops. And right now, because we can't be doing any of that, we're doing a thing called the Bluegrass Ambassadors Academy, and every week we have 2 episodes, one for music lovers and one for kids, that with some of my favorite artists from all over the world. And this week is Fareed Haq from Math Games and Garage Mahal, and from, the most badass jazz guitar player in the world,
Yeah, Fareed's wonderful.
Yeah. So you can check all that out at bluegrassambassadors.org. It's all right there. So
great. I really appreciate the work you're doing, bud.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time to do this conversation and to have this conversation with me.
Anytime, dude. Anytime.
One of the most entertaining things, well, depending on your perspective, that has come out during the pandemic is something called Tiger King. It came out on Netflix. Did America ask for the Tiger King? No. Did America need Joe Exotic? Probably not. Did America deserve Joe Exotic and his incredible, tremendous music videos? Absolutely. What are your thoughts on the series?
Pointless.
You didn't really enjoy it, did you?
I didn't really enjoy it.
I did, and maybe it's just the white trash in me.
It was interesting to see a whole different world I knew nothing about.
The animal world?
Yes. Zoo world.
Yeah.
Exotic animal world.
Very exotic. Very methy.
All of them. We all had multiple partners.
And meth. What was the sexiest aspect of Joe Exotic to you? And I'll wait. You can take your time on that. Think about it.
Oh, no, I got it. I think it was the leather pants.
The leather pants, yeah. I liked when the girl's arm got ripped off.
That was good.
He changed. Well, let me finish. I didn't love that part, but just the fact that he went and changed into like an EMS outfit before responding to the crisis, I thought that was entertaining.
Costume changes.
So many costume changes. I thought afterwards, I thought it was funny that people were debating whether or not it was actually Joe Exotic singing the tracks. He's like, well, how does he? He's like, yeah, I'm Joe Exotic. Come on down to the Tiger Park, And then he gets on to singing, and he sounds like Alan Gentry or something, or like
Jackson?
What's maybe Garth Brooks. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a country. He's got this like full, not white trash sounding, voice on these tracks, which I would encourage you to go on YouTube and go to Joe Exotic TV and check out some of the delightful videos and music videos.
Or not.
Yeah, it depends on what you're into, I guess.
We were fortunate enough to have an incredible sitar player and friend, Naryan Padmanabha, perform an exclusive track for Galaxy Tenants titled Orbit.
We want to thank the doctors, nurses, grocery workers, truckers, and all of the essential workers across the country that are keeping America afloat. Thank you.